pragmatically, the policy makes no sense.
We're talking to Andrew Bacevich, professor of history and international relations at Boston University. He's a Vietnam War veteran. His most recent book, now out in paperback, is The Limits of Power, The End of American Exceptionalism. We'll come back to our conversation with him in a minute. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Our guest is Andrew Bacevich. He's professor at Boston University, professor of history and international relations. His latest book, The Limits of Power, The End of American Exceptionalism. President Obama announced his plan to send an additional 21,000 U.S. troops to Afghanistan late this March in terms of continuing the fight against al-Qaeda and Taliban.
We are not in Afghanistan to control that country or to dictate its future. We are in Afghanistan to confront a common enemy that threatens the United States, our friends, and our allies, and the people of Afghanistan and Pakistan who have suffered the most at the hands of violent extremists. So I want the American people to understand that we have a clear and focused goal: to disrupt, dismantle, and defeat al-Qaeda in Pakistan and Afghanistan, and to prevent their return to either country in the future. That's the goal that must be achieved. That is a cause that could not be more just. And to the terrorists who oppose us, my message is the same: we will defeat you. And to achieve our goals, we need a stronger, smarter, and comprehensive strategy. To focus on the greatest threat to our people, America must no longer deny resources to Afghanistan because of the war in Iraq.
Admiral Mike Mullen, chair of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, who designated the war in Afghanistan as the U.S. military's main effort just last week, was in Afghanistan and justified the president's call for a surge in an interview with NBC's The Today Show.
There's no question in my mind that these 21,000 troops are absolutely vital. We haven't had enough troops in Afghanistan to, once we are in an area to clear it, we haven't had enough troops to hold it, and these troops will allow us to do that.
Andrew Bacevich, what about that?
I think the concept is deeply flawed to the extent that one would want to implement the concept of, in essence, pacifying Afghanistan. It's going to take a lot more than 21,000 additional U.S. troops to do it. This is an enormous country and a difficult country. So if President Obama wants to defeat the Taliban, then he is indeed undertaking a very ambitious enterprise, and we probably ought to be expanding the size of the United States Army by at least 50%. And he ought to sort of own up to the fact that the project that he's embarking on is one that's going to take 10 or 15 years. I mean, in this context, I think it's worth noting the comment that General Odierno in Iraq made over the weekend at a press conference. I think the question was something to the effect that, hey, how about the continuation of violence in Baghdad after the success of the surge? And Odierno, I think rather petulantly, said, hey, look, this insurgency is going to go on for another 5, 10, or 15 years. I agree with that assessment in Iraq. And I think that what's the narrative of Iraq is something that is likely to be repeated in Afghanistan, that that as Obama makes Afghanistan Obama's war, this could well end up defining his administration and impairing his administration as much as the Iraq War defined and impaired the presidency of George W. Bush. And again, I'd go back to my earlier point. Do we really possess the capacity to undertake that kind of an enterprise, especially in a time of significant economic distress? And above all, is it necessary for us to try to pacify Afghanistan? And I think if we take a realistic assessment of the threat, which is real but not existential, I believe the conclusion is we don't have to pacify Afghanistan, much less Pakistan next door.
Andrew Bacevich, lay out the triple crises you say face America today and your argument about the limits of power.
Well, I mean, I think the essence of the point that I want to get to here is that Washington's inclination to view the economic crisis as not connected to our national security crisis is a big mistake. That there is really one overarching problem, and I think the essence of that problem is that we have so mismanaged our economy, falling into the habit of living beyond our means. When I say our means, I mean not simply the government's reckless spending, but also the penchant of the American people for conspicuous consumption. We've so mismanaged our economy that we have fallen into the habit of thinking that we can defer a day of reckoning by relying on American hard power to create a global environment that will sustain our profligacy. And the chickens really came home to roost in the latter half of 2008. We don't have enough hard power in order to reshape the global order so that we can continue to sustain the American way of life along the lines that we came into the habit of doing. We need to change the way we live rather than focus so much an effort on changing the way others live in places like Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Talk about what you mean, Andrew Bacevich, when you talk about the empire of consumption.
Well, this is a phrase that's not my phrase. It's one that was coined by a Harvard historian, Charles Meyer. His narrative of post-World War II U.S. history focuses on the transformation from the United States from being an empire of production to becoming an empire of consumption. I was born in 1947, and I grew up in northwest Indiana amid steel mills and oil refineries. And it certainly was a very vivid impression of my boyhood that whatever it was, we made it. I mean, we made the stuff that the world needed. That was the empire of production. I don't mean to wax nostalgic or to overlook the many evils that existed in American society, but we were the industrial engine of the world. And what Meyer shows in his book, and what I also retrace in my book, is the process where by the time we get to the 1970s and into the 1980s, that empire of production had become an empire of consumption. It's remarkable to me to hear people commenting on our current economic situation and emphasizing that the solution lies in just getting the American people to get out there and consume again. I mean, to go back to the old habits of overspending that had established themselves by the 1990s. Even today, there seems to be precious little recognition that the long-term well-being of American society requires that the American people and the American government learn to live within their means. And to revert back to the discussion of Obama's national security policy, it seems to me that his administration is just as bad as the Bush administration in refusing to recognize the need to live within our means. And one gets that by looking at the ever-growing size of the defense budget. One comes to that conclusion when assessing his policies in Afghanistan and Pakistan.
Andrew Bacevich, you're a Vietnam vet, you're a graduate of West Point, you're a conservative Catholic, and I want to go to that point of conservative. Whether you think these lines are breaking down right now, the definitions of